Introducing our guest this evening will be Ambassador Gould, a member of our Board of Trustees, formerly the American ambassador to the Netherlands, a great and long friend of the Council. Ambassador Gould.
Thank you, Frank. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The country of Lithuania is one of the most remarkable examples of accordionism that I know of. I'm sure you're all aware that in the 13th and 14th centuries, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania extended from the Baltic to the Black Sea and included the cities of Smolensk and Kiev. That it was one of the major powers, the major power for some 200 years of Eastern Europe. Later they affiliated with Poland, and they had a joint arrangement, which I'm sure the ambassador can explain better than I, for a great number of years. Since that time, the fortunes of Lithuania have had waned, and as you know, they as a result of World War I, they again resumed their independence, and up until about 1940, when the Germans took over, they were an independent country. Then the Germans took them over. The Russians pushed the Germans out. The Russians dominated the country until the 1990s, and thank God, with the the failure of communism and the collapse of the Soviet Union, again the strong themes of independence arose in Lithuania. And we have today a young man, a historian, a wonderful representative for his country, a man who knows this country and has studied here, who has written a number of books, and will address for you the extraordinary difficulties that this inspiring country has gone through in the last 50 years. It's with great pleasure that I introduce to you Ambassador Eidintas.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gould. It was a great pleasure with you to see how our team was winning by you organized a tournament of how you call hockey?
Field hockey.
Field hockey from Šiauliai city. It was women's team, and we have result of the sport event today's meeting. Thank you very much for coming and joining our conversation about Lithuania and what's going on in Lithuania. Also, I'm very appreciate that you remember our pretty difficult history of 20th century, 5 occupations by foreign troops of Lithuania, and really thanks for our heroes and international support, including American, United States support is based on extremely important Baltimore, U.S. and Baltimore Lithuanian community, which some representatives I saw tonight, I can see tonight. Now we are, since September 1993, free of foreign troops presentation in Lithuania after Russia withdrew last Russian troops from the last Soviet military bases, which was from the end of 1939. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you today and share our perspective on Lithuania's security situation, which has evolved considerably over the last several years. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and communism in Eastern Europe, Cold War threats have disappeared too. Nevertheless, Lithuania and the Eastern Baltic region as a whole still face security risks and challenges. Lithuania sees the best, in fact, the only solution to these challenges in membership in NATO and the European Union. As NATO prepares for expansion, there is a need for a credible security strategy to be extended to the Baltic states in the context of the new emerging European security architecture. Lithuania's approach towards the development of this architecture is based on the belief that security, stability, and prosperity in Western Europe have been ensured by European integration and transatlantic solidarity. The latter we understand as maintaining the US presence in Europe. Because Baltimoreans are Americans, I want to mention that without without the United States present, many problems we cannot solve by ourselves, even in the West Europe. I want to mention one example. When NATO countries were together with the United Nations Organization, we are organizing I-4 troops for Bosnia to implement a peace in Bosnia. Many West European, even West European countries said, if the United States are not involved in this business, we will not participate too. So you can imagine how significant is the role of the United States in West Europe and even in Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe. This security strategy for the Baltics, as we see it, should entail parallel and mutually supportive enlargement of the European Union, NATO, and the Western European Union. As we understand it, if the aim of European Union and NATO enlargement is to enhance the stability and security of all of Europe, not just a part of it, European Union and NATO enlargement must include Lithuania. Lithuania, after all, is now and has always been a part of Europe, historically and culturally. Historically, as a part of European history, culturally, as a Catholic country, and sharing the same values as all Europe. We do not seek to join Europe because we are already in Europe. Therefore, our security cannot be separated from the security of the rest of Europe. If any one part of Europe is not secure, then Europe as a whole is less secure. At this point, I would like to speak briefly of Lithuania's economic reform, of our steps to reintegrate into Europe in a practical sense. Reforms aimed at the development of an open market economy in Lithuania have been quite successful, and Lithuania is continuing its integration into the world free market economy. We are accelerating privatization and liberalization of trade. Legal and institutional reforms are being implemented. In short, an open market economy is developing. Following a period of economic decline after independence in 1990, from 1994, in fact, our economy has been recovering. Our GDP, gross domestic product, is growing, inflation is low, and the national currency is stable. In 1994, for example, GDP per capita in Lithuania was $3,700 US. This year, our GDP should grow by about 3%. Inflation has been basically harnessed, dropping from 1,100% in 1992 down to this 35% in 1995. Privatization, which was begun in 1991, constitutes the core of our economic reform. More than 60% of our GDP is now produced by the private sector. 90% of our farms and 97% of housing is in private hands today. We are preparing to privatize minority stakes in such sectors of the economy as telecommunications, transportation, and energy. Lithuania's monetary policy is based on the currency board principle. This helps to liberalize capital movements and limit inflation. Money in circulation is fully backed by gold and foreign currency reserves of the Bank of Lithuania. The national currency, the litas, has been stable since its introduction in June 1993. And we have a fixed rate with dollar. Now it's 4 litas, $1. So if you're making some business in Lithuania, then you're going to the bank, transferring into dollars, and it's no limits to take out from the country. Lithuania ran a trade deficit in 1995, but the reorientation of our trade to the West continues. The West already accounts for more than half of our trade. Nevertheless, there is still much potential for improving trade between the US and Lithuania, as trade volumes are still modest. Last year's turnover in trade between our two countries was almost $80 million. I'm very glad that every year our bilateral relations are developing very successfully, including the political, economical, and a new sphere for us in military cooperation. After we signed in 1994 the memorandum about the cooperation in military field, we have a really good help from having common exercises. The United States is very much supporting the idea of Baltic Peacekeeping Battalion, of creation of Baltic Peacekeeping Battalion. We making this battalion, training this battalion together with Latvians and Estonians. Also, we start to create a new, one more peacekeeping battalion together with Poles. After a very rapid improvement of historical relations between Lithuania and Poland, after we signed a treaty about friendship and cooperation, the cooperation with Poland is very active, and we're very glad that now Lithuania doesn't have any big problems with our neighbors. Foreign direct investment in Lithuania has been slow, returning to the economical problems, but is increasing. By the beginning of this year, foreign investment in Lithuania totaled $360 million. It's not. We are not very satisfied, and of course we must work on some liberalization of our laws and work very hard with our bureaucrats, which sometimes, stopping good projects and interpreting good laws, but against the investor. So it's a problem probably in many countries, and it needs a time, and it needs to develop some responsibility for people which are in very important positions, but sometimes not doing everything what they must do. The main foreign investors in Lithuania are countries of the European Union. Our laws on foreign investment provide a considerable degree of security for the foreign investor and also offer tax breaks. The opportunity for foreign investors to acquire land and progressive revision of our legislation to conform to European Union standards are some of the factors that should lead to a substantial increase of foreign investment. We are, of course, especially interested in potential U.S. investors. I want to explain a little bit about the land, because the problem about investments in Lithuania was the land. Our law provide only to rent the land for 99 years around the facility. But Western businessmen, they want to live more than 90 years, almost all of them. and they asking just to have a law letting them to buy this land as a private ownership. But it was not, so we had no law about that. Now we let them to buy land around the facilities of plant or manufacturer which they buying or sharing a capital with some as a joint venture. And I think that especially European Union countries are now almost satisfied. From the other hand, it's a rule that if you want to join European Union, you must have this kind of legislation. We are, of course, especially interested in the potential U.S. investors, and I can with a great pleasure to inform you that our biggest investor is a company, because you all quit smoke, so then Philip Morris came to Lithuania. So now we have 25 million investment in Philip Morris and Klaipėda tobacco plant, and also some chocolate firms working in Lithuania. Also, Fluor Daniels making a project of oil terminal of the Baltic Sea, and some other German firms and Norwegian Shell. We have Shell gasoline stations in Lithuania. Today we have more than 200. I want to mention first of all that we have 3.7 million population, and we have 200 gasoline stations, as Statoil, Norwegian firm, very famous, Shell, and other Neste, Finnish company. And now, you know, in Lithuania you can drive very safely, because it's not necessary to look in the map where is the gasoline station, because it's on every corner. Current priorities in Lithuania's foreign economic policy today are European integration and membership in the World Trade Organization. 2 years ago, Lithuania signed a free trade agreement with the European Union, and last year we became an associate European Union member. We are currently negotiating for entry into the World Trade Organization. According to the Europe Agreement we signed with the European Union last year, Lithuania adheres to the standards of the Maastricht Treaty for European Monetary Union, uses them as guidelines for economic reform in Lithuania. As a matter of fact, already last year Lithuania was able to meet the Maastricht Treaty's targets for budget deficits, national debt, and currency stability. This, of course, means that Lithuania has become more attractive for American investors and business persons. And so it's optimistic view, right? And let's return to the political questions. The topic of this question is the security. I'm often asked, why does Lithuania so desire to join NATO, as other countries of Central and East European countries? Let's first mention values, the core Western values that we all share: democracy, the rule of law, a market economy. We feel that it is one of the utmost importance to jointly pursue, uphold, and defend those values. This task is hardly possible without the tools designed to foster comprehensive and indivisible security. The European Union and NATO have been the most successful structures in this regard. Therefore, their enlargement eastwards becomes natural and imperative in the process of consolidation of shared Western values in our joining the family of like-minded nations. We fully agree with the provisions of the NATO enlargement study, which state that in preparing for NATO expansion, particular consideration should be given to those potential European Union members who have shown an interest to join NATO. I would like to ask, given our geopolitical situation, what real alternative do we have for assuring our security? I don't want to examine the question of whether Russia poses any kind of clear and present danger to Europe or to its immediate neighbors. I must nevertheless point out that Moscow has for some time now spoken of a sphere of influence on the territory of the former Soviet Union, of policing the zone. Recent developments could lead one to believe that our large eastern neighbor is motivated less by a fear of NATO, but more by a fear of losing influence in the former USSR, that is, in the area that Moscow believes to be its traditional sphere of influence. I can most definitely say that Lithuania has no desire whatsoever to be part of such a Russian sphere of influence, or however else it might be called. Let's examine our position on the various options we face. It is obvious that Lithuania cannot rely solely on its own national means of defense. There is no historical precedent in Central and Eastern Europe for countries successfully defending their sovereignty on their own. There is also no precedent for regional security structures, which, in any case, would be unnatural and artificial and would lack the inner resources and momentum to sustain themselves. As NATO expansion is being discussed, Russia, for its part, has offered some ideas on regional security arrangements as an alternative to full NATO membership for Central and Eastern European countries, including the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. We feel that such arrangements would not provide the same security as NATO enlargement. We fear that some of those proposals would have the effect of undermining NATO as we know it. The collective protection of certain values fosters the creation of NATO. If NATO is unable to embrace nations espousing those values, it will be unable to adapt to new realities and its a new mission. Lithuania is fully cognizant of NATO's desire for a transparent and democratic enlargement process. Lithuania fully agrees that NATO enlargement should be conducted with due regard for the overall security environment in Europe and for the legitimate security interests of all countries, including those which are not prospective NATO members. Nevertheless, such transparent discussion about the objectives and modes of enlargement should not evolve into negotiations on these matters with Russia, as this would reduce Central and Eastern European countries to passive subjects of NATO enlargement instead of full-fledged participants. Let's look at how we envision the process of enlargement. Our position is based on the principle of first who and then when. Let me explain. In order to ensure that the gains made by the new democracies of Central and Eastern Europe are not undermined, Lithuania feels that invitations to enter into talks with NATO should be extended simultaneously to all interest partners. This would remove any doubt and would prevent instability among those partner states that may take longer to actually obtain full membership. Of course, we are realists. Lithuania recognizes that not all partners would be ready or eligible for full NATO membership at the same time. However, by completely opening the door at the first phase of enlargement, all interested partners would clearly be included in the process and would avoid the instabilities inherent in a more selective invitation process. We are hesitant to endorse the principle of case-by-case NATO enlargement. Such a process of enlargement would be ambiguous, as it would not specifically indicate which countries would eventually be included in enlargement. if this definition will not be accompanied by the clear understanding that case by case applies to procedure only, but not to the political commitment to enlargement, it will only increase the sense of security deficit for all countries aspiring to join the alliance. Of course, we are concerned not only with NATO enlargement. We are convinced that at the same time it will be crucial to maintain Russia's engagement with the West. Nevertheless, this engagement should neither suspend nor delay the integration of Central and Eastern European states, including Baltics, into European and transatlantic structures. I stress that we are opposed to partial enlargement of NATO. Halting NATO enlargement at the Lithuanian-Polish border would impede a process of great importance in the light of European integration, reconciliation between Lithuania and Poland. If NATO enlargement excludes the Baltic states, and if accession negotiations do not begin simultaneously with all candidate countries, it will create an artificial dividing line, instability and security between the Baltic region and Central Europe. Indeed, if Poland is admitted but Lithuania left out, Lithuania could become a frontline state on the wrong side of the line. In such an event, we doubt that we would feel as secure as, say, Sweden or Austria did during the Cold War. I would now like to mention the problem of the Kaliningrad region, former East Prussia region, now the Russian exclave between Lithuania and Poland on the Baltic Sea, which was decided to have in Potsdam, in Potsdam by alliance in 1945 after World War II. We do not feel that certain issues related to the Kaliningrad region should be an obstacle to Lithuanian membership in NATO. Many Western officials think the same way. In fact, our membership in NATO would help solve, in the context of NATO-Russian engagement, issues related to Kaliningrad. Most importantly, Russian military transit to and from Kaliningrad across Lithuania. On the other hand, should NATO expansion stop at the Polish border, issues related to Kaliningrad could become a flashpoint for confrontation. We feel that Lithuania should not be left alone to deal with problems related to Kaliningrad. The Kaliningrad region, after all, was created by the decisions of the Allied powers after World War II, and we believe that responsibility for dealing with issues related to Kaliningrad should be shared. It's not only Lithuania's business. At this point, I would like to raise the issue of Lithuania's alleged indefensibility, which is often indicated as one reason to keep Lithuania out of NATO. Defensibility, obviously, is a concept subject to interpretation, as pointed out in the RAND Corporation recent study on NATO enlargement and the Baltic states. The study writes that Baltic representatives correctly point out that Western security guarantees have been extended to areas whose defensibility was questionable, for example, West Berlin or Kuwait. But those territories was defended. What is needed to make any region defensible is the political will to defend it. It becomes indefensible only when that will is lacking. We believe we are no less defensible than other Northern European countries. I was mentioning Baltic Peacekeeping Battalion. We sent 3 platoons of Lithuanian soldiers to Bosnia in peacekeeping. We sent 34 soldiers to I4 to implement the peace. And I want just to mention that seeking NATO membership, we seek not only to be selfish consumers of security, but also generous producers, now in very small size. A Lithuanian platoon is right now serving in the American sector in Bosnia very successfully, but a few weeks ago we suffered our first casualty in Bosnia when a jeep in which was a Danish driver, our senior lieutenant, and 2 Lithuanian soldiers went on anti-tank mine, and the officer was killed. It was our first casualty in Bosnia. This shows that we are ready to pay our price for contributing to securing peace. After all, there can be no higher goal than peace and security. And we can best contribute as a NATO member. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Ambassador, we thank you for a most interesting presentation. The floor is now open for questions until 10 minutes after 7. The question, I think, is would you comment upon the possibilities of cooperative relations between Lithuania and the former Soviet Union, Russia in particular, in the future?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for this question. As I probably mentioned briefly, the threat is about the past sad history. But it doesn't mean that we are blocking or stopping our relations with Russia. I don't think so, but because in spite of that, for example, our trade is growing with West Europe and is every year is less and less with Russia. And now only we have about 35% of our export to Russia. 5 years ago it was 85 almost, approximately. But there are many problems, and I want to mention one. In November 1993, Russia's Prime Minister, Mr. Chernomyrdin, signed a package documents in Vilnius, in our capital, with our Prime Minister Šleževičius, 8 agreements about free trade agreement, so organizing, letting to improve our business trade relations, because many of our biggest plans, so-called plans of former all Soviet Union significance, are very big. For example, TV sets plants, radio electronics of former Soviet Union style and type, and cooperation is real necessary. But after this, unfortunately, after signing those agreements, we understand that it doesn't work, and it was not Lithuania's guilty. Then Lithuania always was a biggest merchant. We are exporting our dairy and beef to Moscow and St. Petersburg, at that time at Leningrad. So it was straight relations, and people knows each other. For today, a big our plans of stockyards have relations with Moscow and St. Petersburg shops. And you know, Russians are accustomed to Lithuanian beef, smoked sausages. They like that. And they remember our products very well. It's, you know, without chemicals, without those, what to say? Preservatives, right. It's a real food. And they stopped because of double taxation of our goods. And our beef and dairy products cannot compete in the Russian market with Holland, Dutch or Dane products or German products because they became too expensive. We start to look what to do because, you know, if we are very well trained in Soviet system to look what to do in some other way, how to work. And we decided to sign separate agreements with the mayors of the cities, with the mayor of Moscow and with the mayor of St. Petersburg, and we did it. So, you know, how is difficult to work with this country? Because it was goodwill, you know, Prime Minister signed, and somebody was stopping. Good deal. So, and there are some you know, objectives which you cannot force very quickly. And both countries are on transition. We are, of course, more far away, especially in privatization. We privatized 4,000 plants, and as I said, our 70% of young Lithuanian guys working now in private sector, and total about 60% of young generation. We have a problem in 5 years. And because I have an optimism in the future of Lithuania. Yes, not everything is well. We have very big problems, especially with retired people, because what to do, for them is very difficult because small pensions and very high prices of heating, water now, the world prices in fact, and a small money just to survive. Yes, so we're trying to do that. We're developing. I may say that Lithuania's relations with Russia are, may I say, good. We have no problems, probably because we solved the problem with Russians in Lithuania. After declaration of independence, we said that all people who are living in Lithuania in this moment and working in Lithuania might become citizens of Lithuania. It was citizenship law. And now more than 95% Russians of Lithuania are Lithuanian citizens. So they are protected by our law, and we don't need any recommendations from Moscow how to care about it. They are our citizens, that's it. And they are equal, they have Russian schools, they have Russian organizations, newspapers, everything what they need to have. And this is not no problem in our relations. So probably this is very important, and so I think everything is on development, but it takes a time a little bit to solve for Russia most important problems, and for us to work more hard on reform.
The question was, what additional products do you export, and what products would you anticipate developing in the future?
Mm-hmm. Well, export in percent looks foreign trade. In last year, foreign trade increased in 31%. It's very good. 14% and first place of our export is textile, as I said. After this, 12.3% chemicals. Fertilizers. Just Dalia probably will explain. One American firm asked about some fertilizers and we called to Lithuania to the plant of fertilizers. They said we have užsakymų. We sold all production, not done production, for the nearest 5 years. So because, you know, West Europe don't want to build chemical plants in their territories, so we will have a good profit. Yes, I'm joking. 12% mineral products, 10% electrical equipment and machines, and 10% food products. So it's almost structure of our export. So what we want to improve, of course, as I said, those big plans of TV sets, radio, with 5,000 workers, 7,000 workers in previous time, and this is hard. This is a big job. We're cutting them in smaller parts and privatizing in parts, but to have a companion, to have an investment in such huge dinosaur, it's really so all small things are privatized. It's much easier.
The question is, in any of the technical fields, do you have the cooperation of American universities?
Well, the problem, we don't have, not yet, we don't have bilateral agreement about cooperation in higher education or some, it's everything in, may I say, in private initiative and private business. Many American Lithuanians inviting relatives to study or to they have foundations which buying tickets and some paying for the studies. Now we asked the State Department how many our students we have in the United States, about 400. But they came privately through relatives. Just Americans inviting kids to study, which they know or they asking. It's not adoption. It's just for a year, for two. Foundations works as George Soros Foundation in Lithuania very actively, and many of them. But the cooperation between universities also is. Because in Kaunas, when Joseph Stalin closed the Kaunas University in the early 50s, and we reestablished this university in Kaunas University as American type of university, and many Americans coming to teach in this university as if they have vacations or some financial support. The professors from various U.S. universities coming to teach in Kaunas University. So I think that only one minus I saw in that we really not coordinating this cooperation. But the cooperation is pretty active, and we are very appreciative for American universities for the help. I'm not talking just about books, about book collections which are sent to Lithuania, about English language training labs and everything which came. Also mainly on private way, but what difference? It works.
Would you describe the status of your movement toward integration into NATO, specifically if you signed military or intelligence agreements?
Yes, we signed with the United States Military Secrets Protection Agreement, and also we did it with Denmark. So now we're trying to start to produce something in NATO standards in our plans. But of course, it's necessary to arrange the protection of all information, which might be because it's so there are rules. So it's only a good beginning. But we signed, and we have the basis for that. It's okay.
Mr. Eidintas refers to private organizations in Russia which have made recommendations perhaps as strong as using military intervention should the Baltic states come close to joining NATO. And the question is, to what extent do such reports reflect the opinions of the Russian government, as best you know?
Well, looking very straight into this problem, so everybody knows that if they will attack, we will resist. It's no doubts, and I have no doubts about our young generation and young soldiers and young officers. So it's naturally we will have some kind of local war. But as you said, very correct, that it's not Russian government opinion, and but Russian government expresses always the opposing NATO expansion. In fact, every time. So it's one thing. Other thing is that some documents and some authors, as it was published in Независимая Gazeta, article which talks about NATO, also very negative, but how to, as I said before in the paper, in my speech, that they are thinking about former USSR territory as their own. And the typical point of view wasn't in that article in Независимая Gazeta, when authors called our defense forces, or armies of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, as illegal formations, looking from Moscow. If Moscow looks into us as their own region, so it like Chechnya army. It threatens because some politicians like also to sophisticate in the elections campaign in Russia, including Mr. Zhirinovsky, which talks in such a manner that it's difficult to say diplomatically about that. But yes, but I'm optimistic. I think that we will see what happens after elections in Russia, because one thing is to appeal in the elections period to very disappointed public, which wants restoration of strengthness of Russia or Soviet Union, which remembers good snacks and a good vodka in Brezhnev time. And now is no social guarantees, just nothing. The future is on the question. There are so many politicians. Earlier it was so fine. It was one direct Communist Party line. Every 5 years a Congress of Communist Party, and every 5 years the same. To improve, to collect, to build, more and more, and you know, for regular people it was quite enough. Yes, more and more. Every 5 years we will live better and better. Today bad, but after 5 years better. So you know, and now you have this situation, and for politician of today's or Russia or Lithuania, I'm talking about ultra left wing or ultra right wing. It's the same. It's the same because they are too. They are looking into people like in the, I know, in the some figure of mathematic figures, not as a human beings. They're talking in such manner, and they're appealing into this public. They want votes. What they can, how they will talk after elections. It's, I think it's in more serious politicians will talk in more serious manner, but also there are groups of Russian politicians and political parties which understand and clearly understand that Baltic states never will belong to any formation of the territory of CIS, nowadays CIS, or any kind of federation or confederation. They clearly know that we are very different, and our orientation is to be independent. It was shown for last 50 years, very exactly in Lithuania, and what military underground was struggling till 1952. The last partisan groups were killed by the Soviets. So you know, the idea of about independence and democracy, independence, first of all, to live by your own mind, with your own ideas, of course cooperating with neighbors, still exists. So I'm optimistic too. I hope that the Russia will shown probably, no, we must accept every candidate which they will elect. We must live. We cannot change our place, and we know very well that our neighbor is not Canada and Mexico.
The question is, what do you think are the 2 or 3 most important decisions which your country should make in the next year, and who is going to make them?
Well, we will, of course. Yes, probably according to significance. First of all, I think this summer we will start the privatization for hard currency. And as I said, telecommunications, transport, and energy in energy sections of economy. So if we will have some success, I believe we will, then we will stay in more and more, and we will get investments. What we need now, real investments and cooperation. Investments, it means also together that we going to the Western market, because it's to have a loan, it's half a business, but to sell your products, we have full of storages of products, and we have no market. So the second moment, probably, I may stress that creation of free trade zones in Lithuania. So we're planning to create 3 of them. In former, biggest in the Baltic area, former airport of Soviet strategic bombers in Šiauliai, together with air cargo airport. The company, very serious company, Philips, now installing the equipment for this airport. That airport might work 24 hours per day. And also in Kaunas and Klaipėda and seaport. So I think that it will change very radically our situation, because many firms are interested to participate in those projects. And third, of course, the building of oil terminal on the Baltic Sea, and to getting alternative for energy sources for oil and gas. Not only to have that, not only from the east, but only from the west. I think they are most important. Of course, most important are people. But without that, you cannot help for our people too.
The question is, would you comment on the future of democracy in your country, and say something about the status of the various parties, and of the possibility of communist influence returning to a level of distorting the movement toward democracy, I guess.
So we have now socialist type of party majority in the parliament, and the government is from this party, and the majority of that party members are former communists. In other political parties, we have also enough former communists, but they are in Christian Democrats Party and in some others, except to only one independence party, but it's because it's very small. The communists which trust in Lenin and the old system are in the communists of Soviet Union orientation is forbidden. In Lithuania, Communist Party is forbidden. But now they formed so-called not so tough, not so orthodox communists. They made a socialist party, and they will participate in the elections. So we'll see how many votes they will have. Nobody believes that they will have more than 4%, which is necessary to be a parliamentary party. So many people, we are concerned when today's Labour Democratic Party when elections in 1992. But no newspaper was closed. We have 3 private TV channels and one state channel, which is financed by the government. We have many local TV stations, and we have 300 newspapers, 400 magazines. All political parties have a network in all of Lithuania, and they're working free of parliament. So I may assure that if no foreign invasion, we will live quietly. But of course, for democracy, it's necessary to struggle every day. And what government is doing wrong, then all press criticizing, and mass media. So I think now we have really a very optimistic view of today's democracy, and we believe that no one can stop on this development.
The reference the ambassador makes modestly to the size and scope of Lithuania reminds me of having watched it. I'm thinking of a particularly large State Department forum which was conducted annually, and every year representatives from the Baltic states would make their impassioned pleas, which always seemed to me, in my ignorance, to be very poignant. And a lot of the Baltic state residents here would make similar kinds of statements at council meetings over the years. And the whole idea of that circumstance being changed, given the might of the Soviet Union, as I say, induced a feeling of poignancy. But in reality, what we were witnessing, of course, was an act of tremendous courage and heroism, and beyond all of that, a tremendous power and endurance. So we don't in any way underestimate the people of the Baltic states, and in that spirit we certainly admire them and wish all of you very, very well in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I want to wish personally for all of you great success in your life, in business, and great success for this beautiful city, Baltimore. Thank you.